So my name is Zubair, and I work at Mattermost as software engineer. So those of you who don't know what Mattermost is, it's an open source communication platform built for communities and enterprises. Open source alternative to Slack and Microsoft Teams. So the next question would be, why did we move to a monorepo? So monorepo ecosystem, Mattermost ecosystem, consists of so many plugins which are made by third-party open source contributors and also the main projects. So being open source, you also get a lot of open source contributions from hundreds of other open source contributors, and we wanted to make it easy for them to get started. So the time between they actually start writing the code should be really less. Being separated, when the repos are very much spread apart, it takes a considerable amount of time to set up each project and start gets up to running. So increasing the developer experience not only increases the experience at our team, but also all the other contributors who are contributing to Mattermost. And with that, it also brings standardization of tooling, standards, and everything. So imagine a contributor coming to one project, and that project is following its own standard. And then he moves to another project that uses its own. So having a unification among the standards with the monorepo was really, really convenient. And then CI workflows. Imagine you have changes in a server, changes in a web app. So being a separate repositories, the CI have to first get the changes in server repository, and then in the web app repository, and generate deploy preview URL. So when we started moving to monorepo, it was very easy to bring all these changes across the server, web, mobile into one single pipeline, and pretty easy to get the deploy preview URL up and running. So the current folder structure looks something like this. There is server, then web app, then boards. As I told you, it is a product of, it's an internal product of Mattermost, channels, and playbooks. So all this are the web app part of it, the server part of all these products, again in the server app. Now, because these products had their own engineering teams, they were free to use whatever, they were free to use in their own limit the technology which they suited for them. For example, one of them uses Apollo GraphQL, one of them uses Redux Toolkit, one of them uses old Redux, and one of them uses like ancient React Select library, right? How do you get all of them together? Because that makes sense, right? Because they were all from different teams. So that made sense. So when you're getting into monorepo, it was not just copying folders together. We had to make it work so that they deploy together in a single versioning, and they run together, most importantly. So on the server side, we had something called multi-product architecture, which managed the deployment and the hosting of the app. On the web app part of it, how did we do that, right? So the initial two things that we had to do was get stuff into npm Workspaces and use Webpack module federation. Okay, so why Workspaces? As I told you, each of them had their own architecture. Each project had their own architecture. Luckily, they were using Webpack underneath, which made it easier to get builds and all. So basically, Workspace is your projects with your workspace name, and we define each project by a workspace name as like this: channels, boards, playbooks, and all. So when you run the command on the root directory, it will go to each workspaces, execute that command. So we had some scripts written for building, right? And how do you run all these workspaces? So we had again a script written which would go to each project, start the Webpack dev server for it, and then point all of them together to single dev URL, right? So then was the model federation, right? Because being in Monorepo, we also had to share code among other repositories. And We also have we have to share code with the other third-party plugins, right? Because we have plugins for Zoom, GitHub, Jira, etc. So we had to be mindful of how are we going to share code not only internally, but also the other third-party plugins. So that's where module federation we use. So they are users of module federation to do micro front ends, but we did is to share code across the project. So what you see is each Webpack config of a product will have the name and the remote entry file where the module is entered. And then we have some shared dependencies. So whenever Webpack sees this shared dependencies, it will say, hey, React is common across products. Let's make a different dependency and module for it. And when similarly for React DOM, React Intel. Now, what this would make use of it is, when you're building the web app, it will first build the products, each of them, and when the Webpack module federation sees that, hey, this is a single package that I want to extract out, so it'll extract that out. So we get a single build for all the projects. And so what were the challenges? I mean, yes, it was hard. I mean, it took considerable number of time for us to move to this. I think the biggest challenge which we faced was of having dynamic URLs, because they were all different projects. They were all had their own Webpack configuration, and they all have their own Webpack dev servers, right? So all of them had to, after the Monorepo, all of them had to run concurrently. So when you say make start, it not only has to start web app, but also have to start the boards, the plugins, and all the packages which are there. So I think the biggest challenge was for us to figure out how do you dynamically resolve the URLs. And then there were obviously changes to CSP, because we had to modify our existing CSP to accommodate other products in the same web app. So what was the next thing? So if I've told you before that we have third-party plugins. The way these third-party plugins hook into the web app is by something called plugin API. It's a Mattermost plugin API where the third-party plugins can come and render their own components. It has that architecture has its pros, but it has its cons as well. So we are looking into moving that architecture to Webpack module federation as well. That is something we'll be focusing on next. Then, yeah, so Mattermost is at github.com/Mattermost/Mattermost. And thank you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to join me afterwards. Thank you.